Hey, it's Suze Montgomery of Schmooze with Suze, who's losing her voice, but I'm going to tough it out. I've got my friend Rose Hayden Smith here. Rose and I connect on like a zillion different levels. And wow, honey, welcome. I'm trying to think how many levels. Okay, food,
yes.
History, keep going. Let's gardening,
politics.
Politics. Ooh, we could get into that. Books. We're big readers.
Community involvement.
Community. Gosh, thanks.
And we have the same birthday.
Same birthday. We're born on the same day. Of course, we're special. So welcome.
Well, thank you for having me.
I'm so honored to have you here.
Oh, I'm honored to be here. I've wanted.
So can I see that book? I'm going to
come
show it
on
to
for a long time.
And I'm not going to lean into the camera on this one because I'll get spanked. But here's the book. This is amazing book. I mean, it's not only amazing in content, but the historical significance and telling the story about America, how they ate, and the pictures and the illustrations and the stories. I mean, this is really, it'll take you a while to read it because it's one page at a time, because there's a lot to ingest, because it's so actual, factual, and true. It's really good stuff. Amazon?
Amazon.
It's on my iPhone. It's on my iPad. I love it. Read it. Buy it. Okay, let's talk you. So, what's been happening with you since I saw you last?
Yeah, I'm writing a daily blog for the University of California Office of the President for its Global Food Initiative.
How'd you get the gig?
I'm not sure. I'm really lucky. Really blessed. I've been working in food and agriculture for the university for, gosh, like 25 years.
Oh,
and
that's how you got the job.
Yeah, I have a pretty big range of experience and a pretty broad perspective. And so the name of the blog is called the UC Food Observer. And I pick a different topic every day and sort of dive into it. We also, not only do I write original content, but we curate content from the best news sources.
What do you use for primary sources?
Oh my gosh, well, we follow all sorts of popular news sites that cover food and ag. We also go to some places that other people might not think to go to. They're a little more technical. So if you go to our site and our Twitter feed, our Facebook page, you'll see just a whole range of content, everything from nutrition information to profiles of individuals to information about agriculture policy.
Very sophisticated.
Pretty sophisticated.
I mean, it's not like
menu.
a recipe book, but it's it's deep content.
It is deep content.
And if you're a wonk like you and I mean, this is the kind of stuff we just go crazy about. This is why I love it, because I can just sit there and read, and I lose track of time reading this because it's stuff that is of interest to me. It's not like, and there, like we talked about before, there's a whole new resurgence on cooking.
Oh,
and also, but the companion to that is also the research that goes into it. For example, when somebody says, well, I wish I could cook like you, and you probably get the same thing, it's like, well, I always say if you can read, you can cook. But there's a whole generation of people that have never cooked before, or never understood where their food sources go, and they don't understand about the sustainability and how it's a larger perspective than just a recipe or just a pumpkin. So what goes into this pumpkin? What's the genesis for this pumpkin? Where does it come from? I mean, what's the history of this? And then you get into really deep research. You must have fun all day, huh?
I have fun all day.
You
every
get
day.
paid for this?
I get paid for this.
Amazing.
I feel really,
What a gig.
really lucky to get paid to write about the thing that interests me the most,
And
which
what,
is
were
food
you
and
always
agriculture.
like this? What were you like as a kid?
No. So, well, I was a weird kid.
Were you kind of nerdy?
I was a nerd.
So was I.
Yeah, and I was just very interested in writing. I was very interested in history as a kid. And my parents were wonderful. They indulged that, and they took me all over the United States to look at historical sites, and they bought me all the books that I could read. But it wasn't until I was in my early 30s that I became very interested in food and agriculture.
What was the catalyst that made you go there?
The catalyst was I accepted an academic position with the University of California with cooperative extension, and the assignment was in Ventura County, and I was—
Where were you living?
Well, we had just moved to Ventura County, and
From?
well, we had my husband and I had lived in Los Angeles, and we had lived in the Bay Area, and we had lived in Santa Barbara. I had lived out in Kern County.
Oh, you've been
originally from
spectrum.
Philadelphia.
Oh, Philly.
Yeah, and like you, my family sort of came out to the San Fernando Valley as part of that big aerospace boom in the
post-World War
mid-60s,
II,
right?
too.
And you know where Cal State Northridge is now,
Right.
it was largely citrus orchards.
Valley
and—
State College.
Yeah, Valley State College, and that was when Pierce College was like an
Big ag. It
agricultural
was all ag.
college, and you'd go on your school field trip to Pierce College, and I thought it was really interesting. But you know, my parents, they, you know, we didn't grow up being told, oh, you should go study agriculture in college. And I wish someone would have suggested that I studied, you know, food or
Wouldn't
ag.
you have done that though?
I don't know, right? I mean, you know, it seemed like in my generation, there were a lot of people that were trying to get away from that. And so I don't know that I would have studied that, but it's been really interesting. I've become a lifelong learner about food and
I
agriculture.
think you can always, you know, like when I teach my students that are 85 and above, I mean, that's an average age for my students, that's what keeps them alive. It's just the experience of lifelong learning.
Right.
And I think you can. But I think, I'm trying to think in my head, what was the seminal, or when was that period of time that America, and like yourself and myself, really, unless you grew up in the restaurant industry, which we did, when did you get involved in really the thought of food and the way we grow it? And when do you have a specific time, or did it just evolve?
So I would say it was 1992. And my mentor at the university was a man named Dan Desmond, who was an extraordinary educator, and he was also a rancher and farmer from Lake County. He's now retired. He's emeritus at the university, and he told me, he said, the best way to engage youth and families and communities is through garden-based education, garden-based learning. And I went, really? So I started getting really interested and learning about gardening and the food system. And gardening for me was kind of a gateway drug to the food system. And so then I started getting really interested because, you know, you're gardening with kids, and then you start getting involved in farm to school.
Right.
And then you start, you know, looking at community gardens and, you know, small farms, and then larger agriculture. And I saw, just like many of the people that I worked with saw, this tremendous gap between kids and what they knew about the food system.
They had no knowledge.
No knowledge about where their food came from. And within the context of Ventura County, so you know, this was like in the early 90s, this was like 25 years ago.
No one was doing this.
And this was pretty neat stuff. And our county, I think, has really gotten on board. We have these tremendous farm to school programs.
Correct.
We have the great work that Mary Marinville SEAG is doing, and Chris Sayer, you know, farmer,
Great figs.
outdoor lab, great figs. I've got one of his hairy figs that we just planted in our backyard a couple weeks ago. Chris Sayer is a valued friend.
His mom is one of my very closest friends.
Wonderful.
In fact, I just gave him a piece of rootstock from, I've got a fig tree that's about 125 years old,
gosh.
rootstock. If you want a piece, I'll give you a piece.
I would love a piece.
It's great. It's from Sicily.
Wow.
It's wonderful. Yeah, it's been in the family a long time.
Yeah, and so I learn a lot from Chris Sayer when I want to talk through ag issues. I call Chris Sayer up. We go have coffee. He's really knowledgeable.
He knows so much.
He does.
Well, he grew up on the land.
He does.
Yeah, and
He does.
I go out to Susan's house a lot for dinner. And I mean, I love that piece of property she lives on. And so we walk around the gardens all the time. I'm just fascinated by the whole, I guess it's the whole evolution of food. I mean, because not only was I trained in it, but to me it was more like, it was a family cultural experience.
Right.
We would have these, you know, Italians would sit down at a meal for hours, and of course it was some politics, but it was always the food. It was always the experience of the food. Everything was holidays, everything was around the food. And I'm still this way. I mean, like for Thanksgiving or Christmas, I start thinking months in advance what the menu's going to be. And then I started sourcing, and then I started looking. And then I age my own prime rib. I mean, I'm that nutty.
Yeah.
I mean, my family thinks I'm crazy. But I think to me, it's all about just the way I eat. It's my fuel.
Right.
And but it's more than that.
Well, and
it's history.
And I have to tell you what, though. I mean, I think that we used to have home economics education in school, and we used to. I think the culinary programs are coming back now. There's a resurgence of interest.
But is there the same thing? How are those structured?
I think that they're
Probably
a little
just cooking
bit
classes?
different. But you know, not everyone has always known how to cook. I mean,
True.
And there were times, like you think about Hull House and Jane Addams and the settlement house movement.
Correct.
You know, a component of that were learning kitchens.
True.
Where they were, you know,
True.
working with immigrants, and many of these women were factory women, and teaching them how to cook and, you know, prepare food for their families. But I'm really encouraged by the growing interest in the food system and the interest in food literacy. You know, I think it's really important. And what is interesting to me, and one of the reasons I felt called to write this book.
That book is amazing.
Well, thanks. Is that in terms of policies, public policies,
Correct.
supporting these ideas of food literacy and teaching food production in communities, you know, these policies go back to World War I. And the fact that the first national curriculum, pretty much, through the Bureau of Education was something called the United States School Garden Army. And while I don't love the military rhetoric, we were at war, but it was a program that targeted urban and suburban youth with the idea of teaching them how to grow food in their communities. And you know, it was a school and home program, and it became part of the larger Liberty Garden program, which was very quickly named the Victory Garden program. So we always think of Victory Gardens as World War II. Actually, they started in World War I, but this United States School Garden Army was pretty notable because Woodrow Wilson was the one who actually funded the program, and he used money from the War Department to fund it because he thought it was so essential
innovative
to national security. And so I always, you know, it inspires me to think, what if food insecurity in this nation it's a big issue. It's a big issue. It's a big issue. And right now there's all this research about college students and food insecurity. I mean, incredible percentage of college students that are food insecure. And what if we reframed it and said, okay, food insecurity is really a national security issue. Let's take Homeland Security money and make communities more resilient.
Boy, that's pretty innovative.
And
you think that could happen?
This is what we did. I mean, this is what
But
we did
today?
in World War. I don't know. In World War II, the Victory Garden program, the federal government positioned the Victory Garden program in World War II as nutritional defense. They held a National War Garden Conference in Washington, D.C., 12 days after the bombing of Pearl Harbor.
That's amazing.
To craft a national program for Victory Gardens that would look at school, home, community, workplace. It looked at what would happen in the rural areas in terms of gardening, food preservation. You know, right now, food waste. Huge problem.
Oh my gosh.
Huge problem for us. So in
Pardon
World War I, Governor Dennison in California encouraged schools to spend a certain amount of time each day working with kids and teaching them about food conservation, how to reduce food waste, how to stretch food out. I mean, these are things that we should be doing, and my opinion is that this sort of food literacy, it wraps environmental literacy, food, agriculture, nutrition, healthy lifestyle, sustainability, and it ought to be a national curriculum.
It should be.
It ought to be spiraled up. We ought to be teaching it every day, every kid in this nation.
I mean, that,
know?
well, without, you can have all the rest of the pieces in place,
Right.
but this is like essential.
It is
And if we don't
essential.
teach people how to do this, I mean, what's the old thing about teach man how to fish?
Right.
It's the same principle on that one. I look at, because Italians, which I am, we always had gardens. I mean, that was always,
Right.
and what we used for fertilizer was natural fertilizers. We didn't buy commercial fertilizers. We didn't buy something that was full of, weird chemicals. Like when I plant my tomatoes, oh, you'll love this one. You'll get a kick out of this. This is so Italian. My grandfather taught me to put half a sardine at the bottom root structure of every tomato plant. So since I don't have fresh sardines like he did when I was a kid, I go down to Trader Joe's and I buy a can of sardines for $1.99, come home and rinse off all the olive oil and whatever it is that's preserved in.
Right.
And I cut them in half and put them at the bottom of every single tomato plant.
Well, and you had a great tomato crop this year.
Oh my gosh, it went nuts.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I had too many tomatoes this year. And what happens is it feeds systemically that tomato plant organically for the lifetime of the plant, doubles the yield. And of course, everybody in the family laughs at me, but I always have the best tomatoes.
Well,
there's something to it, though.
A ton of tomatoes this year.
Again, it's the responsible things
Right.
to do with gardening, which is the way we eat. I mean, you have generations that have never seen anything besides fast food.
Right.
They drive through for meals. I have never. Sounds odd. I must be the only person on the planet. But I've never been to a McDonald's. I've never eaten at a McDonald's. It just never has attracted me. It's not the way I eat. I'm not a sugar person. Italians don't eat sugar. So like I said before, give me a stick of butter, I'm in. Give me salt, I love salt. But the butter situation, and now like you were talking about the composition of the plate, and the way we eat, and I said beef is 3 times it's gone through the roof. So now I'm not a big chicken person. I think I'm chickened out. I'm really kind of tired of chicken. So I look for alternatives for protein sources. So, the protein, what is it, 3 ounces a day is probably optimum?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I went to Food Tank last week. Which
Now, what's a food tank?
So Food Tank is a national organization, platform, and Danny Nuremberg is the founder, and they write very interesting and intelligent stuff about the food system, and they sponsor these gatherings that are called food tanks. This was the first farm tank. It was held up in Sacramento, which is now the nation's farm to fork capital.
Right.
And one of the panels that they had was about sustainable protein.
Wow.
It was so interesting. And you had everything on there from people talking about cricket protein to pulses, because this last year was the United Nations Year of the Pulses.
Correct.
And I think that 2017 will be Year of Healthy Plants, and I think it was Year of Healthy Soil. And so the United Nations Food and Ag Organization has great information up about protein consumption. But this panel was interesting, and Nicolette Nyman was on the panel, and she's a vegetarian, but she's also a beef producer.
Wait, Nyman Ranches?
Yes, yes.
And she's a veg?
She's a veg. And so she's written this book called Defending Beef, and I got to interview her last week, and I've got a blog interview up with her. It was very interesting. And then there were some, poultry producers and people at different scales. And then it was very interesting because there was an actual protest by vegans. And so it was very interesting, these discussions about protein consumption. They came into play, this was the year that we redid our national dietary guidelines.
I was going to say, how often is that?
I think it's every 5 years.
Okay.
And so, it was, some people recommended, some groups recommended reducing meat consumption. It didn't make into the dietary guidelines because, there are a lot of competing interests
so
about
they do
this.
actually a mock plate type of diagram, correct?
Plate, yeah. And it is so interesting. I got to interview Angie Tagtoe, who works for the USDA, and she is the executive director for the Center for Nutrition Policy and Promotion, which is the USDA unit that does the dietary guidelines. And so it's a two-part interview, but it's fascinating to learn about the process that the dietary guidelines go through. And
how much is involved with the economy? I mean, does their lobby really drive the conversation? Does it really?
I think that the various lobbies have a lot of influence on the conversation.
For example, I think, what is it? First of all, it's the oil industry is number one. Is dairy number 2 or 3?
Oh, there are large food lobbies, and they definitely, there are lots of interest groups that are weighing in and competing
out there
and
with their hand
talking. And so it's a difficult political process.
And that's, again, where you and I connect. The politics, and it's the politics of food.
It's the politics of food. And there's a really interesting group out there right now called HEAL, and HEAL. And they're really pushing for a national food policy. And this was something that was proposed, there was an editorial in the Washington Post.
I think I read this.
Yeah, it was a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
And it was Michael Pollan,
correct,
Ricardo Salvador, and
correct,
Mark Bittman.
Right.
And so I've been able, since that time, to interview Michael Pollan, to interview Ricardo Salvador.
I'm so jealous.
And they're talking, Ricardo Salvador in particular talks about this need for a national food policy. And the idea of the USDA actually now has something that they created during the Obama administration called NIFA, which is the National Institute for Food and Ag, and it's modeled after the National Institutes for Health, the NIH. So people should go look at the NIFA website. I always tell everyone, I think the best website in the world besides the UC Food Observer is the U.S., and I'm joking, the best website in the world is the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And it is...
you don't think about this, you really don't.
Oh my gosh. So I go every day because there are all sorts of things. There are all sorts of widgets and tools, and you can get data about food security in your area. You can find out if your community is a food desert, although that term is going away.
Where do you think we're going with food? I mean, these issues, I mean, this is big stuff.
It's big stuff.
And it affects everybody every single day.
It affects everyone. And I cannot give enough credit to Michelle Obama and what she has done, and what President Obama has done in terms of food policy,
And you don't hear this.
and raising the issues and improving school lunches. And I've been able to go to the White House garden, and having a vegetable garden, been there a couple of times, wonderful, having a vegetable garden at the White House for the first time since World War II's Victory Garden,
it was the Victory
which was
Garden,
really
yeah.
small. And they are walking the walk there, and what they've done. And I don't think there's any putting the genie back in the bottle. I mean, I think we have this awareness, and I think that we're just going to be continuing to improve. I'm very happy that farmers are getting more attention, and that the work of farmers is being elevated. It should be. What I am hoping, though, is that we need to continue to educate people about the very real challenges and constraints that face farmers, because that's always the thing. As fewer and fewer people produce our food, you get more disconnected. It's really important. Ventura County has a farm day coming up pretty quickly, and we live in such a unique place in terms of agricultural production, and not
Lima
only
beans.
and looking at how it's changed over the decades, but talking to farmers here about the challenges they face. I think it's a great way, but there are opportunities here to actually meet farmers. We're lucky.
True, one-on-one. I mean, you can just go to one of these events, but I think as a whole, we need, as a nation, we really need to prioritize this. I mean, there's so much political circus and rhetoric going on, and it's so confusing right now. I just really hope that somehow we can get back to the basics and get back in focus to what the things are that we really need to teach our children and be more cognizant and aware of, like ourselves. I mean, when I sit around, my friends don't talk food, I talk food. I mean, I bore the snot out of people talking about food, but that's my interest, and it was my life for a lot of years when I worked as a trained chef. It's always to me about the sourcing. And what's in season, and what do you eat what's in season. It's much more economical, it has much more nutritional value, it's better product. They're finally cluing into this. When I was up at the Ojai Valley, and I was up there almost 4 years as their exec, I planted the very first garden at, on the first tee at the golf tee. Yeah, we had an acre garden. It was all herbs, and we had a couple other demonstration plants that we put in there too. And it was really interesting to me, because I would get in the golf cart every day, and I came back to the kitchen. I said, okay guys, this is what you need to do with it. And they just look at me, and I go, this is what you need to do with it. And they just look at me. My God, are we really running out of time? This is impossible. How did that happen? I could be here days with you.
Thank you, though. This is so much fun.
Well, we have to do this, but you and I have to have our own, so we can actually sit around and talk about our own stuff and about the food stuff that is so in the historical significance.
I know, and I tell you,
come back next week.
If you guys are interested in food or ag, if you go to that website, you can enter literally any food or ag topic, and you're going to come up. It's www.ucfoodobserver.com.
That's Rosie. I mean, the blog is amazing. You will be blown away. I was blown away.
A lot of stuff.
And I guess we're out of town. But we're going to do this again. You gotta come back here. This, I mean, not only my twin, but this, we got to talk about some more about this. I want to talk about like food safety.